Professor Clarke, it feels like for the last 2 years we have mostly spoken about this war, the crisis that we've seen across the Middle East as a result of October the 7th. And it does feel like perhaps this is a moment, a historic moment, where this region can be cautiously optimistic that at least the first phase of this deal will go through.
Yeah, Yalda, I mean, it is a moment of cautious optimism, but it is a moment of genuine optimism. This is a very complex first stage. So there are four big elements. So a ceasefire, an exchange of a release of hostages and of maybe 2,000 prisoners in Israel, a withdrawal of the IDF to some agreed lines, and then the resumption of humanitarian aid. So all of those four things have got to happen more or less simultaneously and very quickly in the next 3 or 4 days. So that's a very complex first step, but as a first step, of course, it's very welcome. And this is, in essence, what Joe Biden was offering about a year ago. But the difference is, and I think the difference comes down to the Israeli attack on the Hamas leaders in Qatar on the 9th of September. That was a huge mistake, a strategic mistake by Netanyahu, and it didn't achieve what he wanted. But it so, I think, enraged the Trump administration, who were bounced into it. They were bounced into backing it when they really didn't approve of it at all. And I think that's what converted President Trump to the idea that he was going to lean on Netanyahu in a way that Joe Biden wouldn't have done. And that's what's made the difference. He's lent on Netanyahu to go for this phase. And all of the other states, and the Americans are learning from this, that they really do need their allies. They can't just insult them all the time. And so Qatar, who's very important to them now, Turkey and Egypt have done a sterling job. And then individual negotiators have gone in, and Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, and Steve Witkoff, who carries a lot of authority from the president, along with a lot of other negotiators, have really done a good job, it seems, on the details. But there are immense details, even in getting to this first step, let alone getting any further. But, let's not be churlish. The first step, if it happens in the next couple of days, will be more than has been available or possible in the last 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, Michael, I'm just reading reports here that the United States and Qatar have given guarantees to Hamas that Israel will not resume its bombing once this ceasefire comes into effect. Ultimately, a lot of this is, whether either side trusts each other or not, they're going to have to rely on these negotiators to ensure that this doesn't collapse. And there will be moments where things become incredibly fragile, no doubt. And there will be moments where the ceasefire is breached and perhaps even breaks down. But it will come down to the likes of Donald Trump, the Qataris and others who are deeply invested in this now to ensure that it doesn't collapse and we don't go back to what we have seen over the course of the last 2 years.
Yeah, Yalda, you've lived through these sorts of things in many places in the world, and so you know the score as well as the rest of us, is that you can do a peace deal, and it may look triumphant when you do it, but somebody has got to stick with the deal day in and day out thereafter. And I think we can assume it won't be President Trump after next week. He'll have moved on to other things. So somebody, some group of people and a group of diplomats and some enforcers have got to stick with it day after day after day, because every day, as you say, there'll be accusations, there'll be breakdowns, there'll be backsliding, there'll be problems of specification. And the fact is, neither side in this case, neither the Israelis nor Hamas, trust each other at all. It's not that they've not got very much trust in each other, they have no trust in each other. And what Hamas say, they say, look, the Israelis broke the last ceasefire in March. We're just waiting. They'll break this ceasefire as well. And that, I think, a lot of people think that's entirely plausible. So the United States will have to keep leaning on Israel not to break the ceasefire. And equally, somebody will have to keep leaning on Hamas not actually to reconstitute itself. We still don't know about Hamas disarming. They've not said that they will. The Hamas people are not going to leave the Strip, leave Gaza under some sort of amnesty arrangement with Israel, which they won't believe, because they believe that Israel will still come after them for the rest of their lives, because that's what they do. So that lack of trust is something that will have to be compensated for by a big group of people, even while the stabilization force is put together and more arrangements are made. There's a great deal of work to do. You can't just declare peace and walk away and pat yourself on the back. You have to stick with it day after day after day.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, you were talking there, Michael, about Hamas disarming. Just yesterday, I was speaking to the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak, who said it's almost delusional to think that in this region, and especially with Hamas, given their whole existence and resistance, as they call it, is based on Israeli occupation, and therefore they feel they need to remain armed. And so for them, the idea that you can completely disarm them or, disarm the small arms, he said was completely delusional.
Yeah, and Edward Barak is very right. It is delusional because, I mean, the Israelis said before this operation started back in November 2023, they said they thought there were about 25,000 Hamas fighters that they wanted to eliminate. And they think they've eliminated 20,000 of them. Well, about a month ago, they said that about 3,000 Hamas fighters were staying in Gaza City, and another 20,000, they said, had gone to the south. So even the Israelis themselves seem to believe, as the rest of us do, that they have created about the same number of guerrilla fighters for Hamas as they have eliminated. And that's logical. For every Hamas terrorist who is eliminated or killed, they've got cousins and younger brothers who then take up arms. So, I mean, in one sense, Hamas has lost terribly from all of this because its attempt to create a general war against Israel has failed miserably. The Gazan people have paid the price more than anybody else, as well as the Israelis, the 1,200 Israelis killed and the 251 hostages. A lot of people have paid the price, and Hamas has lost. But they are still in existence. They haven't gone out of existence. They have not been eliminated. And whatever this peace process says in the future about an independent group of technocrats who will build a new Gaza under the international supervision that President Trump will lead himself, whatever they say about that, nobody seriously believes that Gaza will not somehow be influenced by Hamas going forward into the future.
Yeah, which is why, so many were questioning Benjamin Netanyahu's claim that total victory meant the complete elimination of Hamas. You talked also there about the strike that Israel launched on Qatar, and perhaps that was the moment that turned Donald Trump. If we look at the last 2 years and how Israel got to a point where, it thought it could strike Qatar, a sovereign state, it was trying to hit a meeting of Hamas leaders who were discussing these sorts of negotiations and a ceasefire, and that operation essentially failed because those leaders survived, and it left both Qatar and the United States, angry about what had happened. But when you look at the various operations that the Israelis have launched, whether it was against Hezbollah or against Iran, they saw that as victory, decapitating their enemies across this region.
Yeah, and the Israelis were extremely successful in September last year, September 2024, at decapitating Hezbollah. They launched this, brilliant operation where they'd persuaded Hezbollah leaders over some years to take on a certain sort of handset for their communications, and the handsets were all very cleverly booby-trapped, and they injured and killed a whole generation of Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon, and then launched their attack because of that. And so that was a very good operation, which took Hezbollah off the board for the time being, but it doesn't take Hezbollah off the board in the long term. And then the Israelis, launched an assassination against Ismail al-Haniya, who was the ultimate leader of Hamas, when he went to Tehran, when he was in Tehran for the presidential inauguration. And so that emboldened them to think that they're communicating to their enemies that nowhere is safe. If you're an enemy of Israel, we're coming to get you. And that goes back to a very good book by Ronan Bergman called Rise Up and Kill First. And when he looks at the doctrine of rise up and kill first, which is a religious text, or it's based on a religious text, which Israel has adopted since 1948. If you think someone is trying to murder you, and the Jewish people have got very good reason to believe that over the centuries, if you think somebody is coming to murder you, rise up and kill first. And this doctrine of going after all of their enemies, wherever wherever they are, the 1972 Munich massacre perpetrators, they went after them year in and year out. They went after them until they believed that they got all of them in a series of assassinations. And that goes deep into Israeli security thinking. And in the case of the attack on Qatar on the 9th of September, they overdid it. They took America for granted. Netanyahu took President Trump for granted, just the way President Putin takes President Trump for granted. They took him for granted. They thought they could bounce them into it. And it was a huge, huge strategic error. And when the history of this part of the Middle East crisis is written, I think a lot of it will center on the minute-by-minute arrangements whereby the Americans were told about it. They tried to inform the Qataris. They didn't tell them early enough. And the Hamas people escaped by accident because they left their phones in one room and went to pray in another room. And the Israelis struck the room where their phones were in. They killed Khaled al-Hayya's son, but not Halal al-Hayya himself, who's now one of the negotiators. And it was a failure of an operation. But my goodness, it was a political failure, much deeper than that, which has changed the nature of the problem in the months since then.